Hello and welcome to episode 103 of Prose. This week, meet a temporary savior of a doomed people, and re-experience the importance of the oboe. Yet again, I have to say that I hope this episode finds you well all amid the continued social distancing and quarantines and lockdowns. If you are new to this show, please do go back and check out our catalog of over 100 episodes. Additionally, if you want some scrolling to do on social media, go check the show out at Prose Podcast across platforms. If you are enjoying the show, please click that 5-star review wherever you're listening. It really helps out a lot. For easiest access to the show, subscribe using whatever podcast catcher makes you happy. Additionally, do check out the Prose Patreon page at patreon.com/Prose Podcast and consider supporting the show there. Not only will I be eternally grateful, you will get some Prose swag. Lastly, one of my academic heroes, Dr. Michael Ritchie, gave me a great idea. I would love it if anyone and everyone that might have an idea for a classic tale, be it standalone or maybe even better, serial, to toss me ideas for stories you'd like to hear given the Prose treatment. Do keep in mind that they'll have to be public domain though. If you have an idea for an episode amid the quarantine, send it to prosepodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and thanks in advance for your submissions. Let's get to the tale, shall we? This week we have the first and a redux of Charlie Played His Oboe, a very special story to me by my own father, Henry Iverson Magee. Enjoy! The First, an original short story by Jared I. Magee. Little did we know, when we saw him rise, that he would be the first of many. The first of what would someday come to be 11. 11 men sent down from the Almighty to put our people to task. To remind us of just how far we'd strayed from the piety and lives demanded of us by the Almighty. He had chosen us, so we had to be held to a much higher standard than most. He understood this, and by stepping into his divine role, he pushed us to try to redirect our misdirected course, aiming it back towards the heavens. We were all inspired when we learned his story. He was the son of some nobody. Kenaz was his father. His uncle was one of 1,000 Calebs. The only thing distinctive about Othniel was the fact of how generic, bland, and undistinctive he was. That is, until he rose up for the hand of a gorgeous woman of power, Achsa. Othniel knew this olive-skinned beauty would be his transport to power and meaning, and he set forth to conquer the dog Canaanite leader of Debir. There in Debir, Othniel set himself apart for his ferocity and anger and brutality on the battlefield. Where others had broken themselves on the men of Debir and seen their hopes and men and own lives dashed, Othniel caused others' blood to flow, crushed others' hopes, and laid low other men and others' lives. Through that blood, Othniel gained the hand of his high tribal beauty, and he began his continued trajectory to be a hand of the divine. After his unmitigated and rather surprising rout of the heathens, Othniel quickly came to be seen as the apparent successor of Joshua, and therefore the divinely appointed successor to the greatest of our leaders, Moses himself. With that sometimes yoke, sometimes altar placed on and before him, Othniel rose to throw off our change from the northern dog to Shan Rishathaim. For too long had Aram Naharaim held us in bondage. Although it was our people's fault for denying Elohim and straying from him, Othniel knew it was his God-given place to cast off that doubly wicked man. Again, Othniel led our people against a superior force. Again, Othniel pushed against the currents of history. Again, through the will of the Almighty One, Othniel crushed the tribe's enemies of the north, killing those mongrels to the last man, as he knew was necessary. For years, Othniel reigned over all, and at his passing we lauded him, celebrated him. We buried him like the king among men he was. There outside Hebron, among the bountiful vines that bring life to our people, and that, no matter the battering from the world, come back season after season to bear fruit and sustain us and pleasure us and bring us hope. It seemed the only appropriate place to lay such a man to rest. But here at the end of almost half a century of peace, here at the end of one exceptional man's life, many of us have forgotten how and why we have lived so well and so calmly, never having to pick up arms like Othniel did so long ago. The time is forthcoming, though. Unavoidable. The darkness grows in the east, and our enemies conspire to wipe us out in the wake of Othniel's passing. Eglon and Ammon and Amalek shall all be names that our children and our stories will remember, if all keeps going the way it is, if the prophets are correct. So we see a cycle. Humanity cannot attain grace and maintain it. There must always be a fall. Some scholars and philosophers say this is such so that humans can enjoy the blissful highs by having something by which they can compare those sweet times. If we do not suffer, how can we ever truly rejoice after all? I think that this is a shoddy, cowardly explanation. We cannot stay a course. We want choice and freedom. Yet without a strong captain like Othniel at our helm, the people veer back toward their own destruction. We cannot help ourselves. We long for annihilation. At the end of his life, Othniel had seen successes, certainly, and we praised him for it. But his mandate and mission alone, no matter how well accomplished, would come back time and time again, 10 more times to be exact. These non-kings, these non-rabbis, these avengers of and for the divine purpose. The Almighty would throw down heaps upon heaps of punishment for our apostasy. And we would cry out to him, begging him for relief. But those men were there, age after age to remind us of why we languished. We dregged thirsting for eradication, lamenting the tortures needed to take us there, and praising the bulwarks against our own self-induced destruction and pain. So yes, we approach our end, but we have approached our end before with Othniel, and we will approach our end again and again and again and again, forever reliving the same events, seeing names and places change, but resting firm in the knowledge that we will rise, we will fall, and we will learn nothing from it. Thank you for listening to The First, an original short story by me, Jared I. Magee. Please do stick around for our next story this week. I'm sure we'll have a wonderful journey together.
Charlie Played Oboe by Henry Iverson Magee. Charlie was your average 11-year-old boy. And I mean all boy. He'd rather be outside chasing a frog through his mom's flower bed than sitting inside being a couch potato. Benny, the family beagle, was his constant companion and shadow. When Charlie went to the corner store for a soda, Benny was right behind, tracing his every step. It was nothing to find them rolling in the front lawn, or running through the park across the street, or just lying in the grass, looking at animal pictures in the clouds. It was not that he didn't want to play video games, or watch all the latest tunes on TV. It was that his mom and dad couldn't afford to buy those things. They lived paycheck to paycheck. Food on the table and rent were a monthly struggle. His own imagination was his entertainment. No new clothes to wear to school, Charlie gladly wore the used jeans from the second-hand store. He humbly wore his baseball cap and t-shirt and took no thought that life should be any different. Summer break from school was 3 months to be himself and to not be accountable to clock, teacher, or schedule. It was to his dismay that his parents received a letter in the mail assigning him to the next grade in the fall. His new teacher was to be Mrs. Marshall, a goodly one, loved by all her students. And for the first time, Charlie would be invited to participate in the middle school band. Parents were to bring their child during summer break to choose their instrument. Since his dad couldn't get off from work in time to bring their only car, his mom allowed him to walk the 12 blocks to the band room. Time was running late when Charlie walked through the door. Most of his classmates had already come and gone. Charlene was leaving with her mom and her flute, Alicia with her clarinet, David his trumpet. Robert was trying to get air through a tuba with band director Mr. Smith giving guidance and support. "Well, what instrument did your parents rent for you, Charlie?" Sheepishly, Charlie said, "I don't have an instrument." "Well, I'm afraid that you have to have an instrument to be in our band program. The school loaner ones have already been assigned to those who will be in the marching band. There are none of those remaining." Noticing Charlie's disappointment and moved to go to the door, Mr. Smith grasped at ideas quickly. Just a moment. Come back here, Charlie. Let's see what we've got in this closet over here." Mr. Smith opened the double-door closet that usually stored school-owned instruments, but it appeared empty. Except for one black case in the bottom corner. Mr. Smith grabbed it and promptly headed to a table with Charlie to see what its contents might be. When opened, Mr. Smith began assembling the black tube. Charlie had no idea what this was. "What is it?" he puzzled. "An oboe," said Mr. Smith as he put the last tube in place and then tightened the slender reed that completed the mouthpiece. "This is an old reed, but this will at least let you give it a try. Do you want to try it?" The oboe, being an unusual instrument, seemed right for an unusual boy. "Let me try." "Well, hold your lips like this, as if you were blowing down on a narrow straw." Squeaks and squawks were the sounds that pierced the echo of the band room, but he was determined to make this work. "Charlie, now, if you take this instrument, you can't be in the marching band. The oboe is not a marching instrument. It's for the concert band later in the school year. The school will loan it to you, and my wife can give you lessons during the rest of the summer and then after school this fall. Chrissy played oboe in high school and won a scholarship to play in a college symphonic orchestra." Moving forward, each week Mrs. Smith did, indeed, meet with Charlie. "Practice," she said. "Every day for 1/2 hour when you get home." That was no problem. With few friends and no entertainment at home, Charlie would spend all his extra time practicing. He learned to finger the keys just like the beginner book showed, and he held his lips just like Mrs. Smith showed. It was not a pretty sound when he got it right, or when he got it wrong. As Charlie often practiced in the backyard, Benny would put his head on the ground, not caring for the music and noise. It was a concert for one when Twinkle Twinkle Little Star or Jingle Bells was attempted. "Sure sounds like a flock of geese squawking," the neighbors said among themselves. But as the summer days turned to fall, squawks turned into musical notes and squeaks turned into lines of songs. The marching band practiced 7th period. Charlie did his homework in the library and then met with Mrs. Smith. The marching band played their first time at a middle school football game, and they got to march in the senior high homecoming parade. Charlie, he could only watch from the stands. The end of daylight savings time made time short at the end of the day to be outside. Leaves were fallen and a chill was in the air, but that meant that it was time to start the middle school concert band. Mrs. Smith had taught Charlie for 16 weeks now, and he had practiced faithfully. For the first time, Charlie was asked to come to 7th period band. All were assigned chairs. Charlie, being the only oboe, was behind the clarinets and to the side of the French horns. Mr. Smith announced that the band's first concert would be a Christmas concert, only 7 weeks away. Also, one of the songs would be used in the Christmas parade. Music was handed out in folders. Students were encouraged to practice at home. The first song to learn was a medley of familiar songs. The second was an arrangement of Jingle Bells. Mr. Smith gave the band instructions on how they were to sit, hold their instruments, and follow his instructions. Eyes must be on both the music and the director at all times, said Mr. Smith. That will take some practice. The first attempt at music was like herding cats. Or hurting them, maybe. It took multiple attempts to even come close to coming in on time. Only a man who loved music and who loved to teach children music could survive such, yes, noise. Mr. Smith, though, he did. The reward for such patience was 2 lines well done of "O come all ye faithful" after an hour. The reward for Charlie was that after months of constant practice, excellent instruction from Mrs. Smith, and the love of a faithful friend, Benny, Charlie was well beyond the other students at this time. He was not only well beyond those in his band, but also well beyond others his age, period. The ugly duckling oboe player was quickly becoming a beautiful swan. Even the neighbors didn't complain anymore. Some even smiled when hearing his part on "O Come All Ye Faithful" coming from the backyard. Charlie's dad even had to take notice, and when asked to come to the concert, he thought this ought to be something he should make time for on his busy schedule. And when Mr. Smith raised his arms, directing the concert band, all parents and guests were in agreement as Jingle Bells got their attention. They were glad that they had come to support these students. Mr. Smith thanked the audience for their generous round of applause. He spoke of the progress the students had made because of the hard work they had put in, both at school and at home. He thanked them for allowing the wonderful privilege of teaching their students. "Now," said Mr. Smith, "you're in for a special treat." He raised his arms and confidently led the band as they began the Christmas medley. Everyone recognized "O Come All Ye Faithful" and "O Little Town of Bethlehem." And then, to the surprise of all, softly and warmly, a solo by an instrument and a boy with which most were unfamiliar. "Away in the Manger" played like they had never heard. Haunting, but beautiful. There was a "wow" in unison from the audience. The whole band transitioned to "Hark the Herald Angels." A few tears even glistened the eye of several, and with pride and love, Charlie's dad and mom were included in that number. Yes, that was Charlie that played the oboe. Practice and encouragement were as certain as the cold winter's air and the passing of joyous holidays. Charlie continued to meet with the band 7th period, but also Mrs. Smith kept up her bargain to instruct him weekly. Concert practice was now serious business for the middle schoolers after such a hearty applause. Mr. Smith doted in that he had such a hard-working group of children, or as he now put it, young men and women. Charlie was still the same boy inside. He practiced at home more than ever, but to him it was not a thing of effort or hard work. It was something he enjoyed. He enjoyed this almost as much as playing in the fresh fallen snow with Benny. However, he could not stay outside as long as he wished. The cold was just too much. A warm bedroom, with Benny stretched out on the covers while Charlie practiced, was all right for them both. Opportunities to play publicly continued. Mr. Smith arranged for Charlie to play with the marching band during the Christmas parade. Charlie did not march, but Mrs. Smith stood with him as the band stopped downtown, and Charlie was able to do his "Away in the Manger." A hush fell over the small gathered crowd as they were eager to hear such an unusual sound from this unusual boy. Mr. Smith even arranged a longer solo part for the big spring concert. When it was time for this one, the auditorium was filled like never before, and no one was disappointed. "What a wonderful group of students! And who is that boy and what is that instrument?" rang out from all corners. Approaching a year, Mrs. Smith asked her husband if some of the more gifted students might perform a recital concert. Money raised from tickets to the concert would go to provide new instruments and supplies for the band. The junior and senior high directors were told of the idea, and even more excitement was created. Mrs. Smith's former college concert director agreed to judge the participants. For a prize, he offered a tour of the campus concert hall for the winners' families. While others were celebrating the 4th of July and a host of other summer activities, Charlie and a group of his mates from the concert band met daily with Mr. and Mrs. Smith and their tutors. Their recital was just a few weeks away, and Charlie, he was ready to play the oboe. Thank you for listening to Charlie Played Oboe by Henry Iverson Magee. Henry Iverson Magee is an accomplished public speaker, pastor, educator, and farmer. He grew up in southern Mississippi and made a name for himself in Texas, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and, indeed, his home state of Mississippi. He's always been a writer, publishing in numerous newspapers and other publications over the years. Like many stories, this story comes from yarns he used to spin for his sons and other children. Hopefully, we'll feature more work from him here in the near future. The backing tracks for this story were taken from Muse Open at museopen.org. Muse Open is a 501c3 nonprofit focused on increasing access to music by creating free resources and educational materials. They provide recordings, sheet music, and textbooks to the public for free, without copyright restrictions. As they say, their mission is to set music free. A perfect resource for a story like Charlie Played Oboe. The first piece heard here is Fantasy in C, composed by Georg Philipp Telemann and performed by Paul Arden Taylor. The second piece is Chansonnette, composed by Hamilton Harty and performed by Balder den Devel. The remainder of the music is different sections of La Gracieuse, composed by Louis de Quay de Valois and performed by Jennifer Paul. The first piece is being used under a public domain Mark 1.0 license. The second piece is being used under a Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 unported license. And all the music by Miss Paul is being used under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 unported license. A sincere thank you to Muse Open, Mr. Arden Taylor, Mr. Den Devel, and Miss Paul for providing access to such great music.
Thank you for allowing me to reshare Charlie Played His Oboe. That does it for Prose this week. I hope you enjoyed the program. And while you're out there in this strange time, love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life, as it is always stranger than fiction. I'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks for joining me.